Enterprise. Its 5-year mission: to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilization, to boldly go where no man has gone before.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Landing Party, the best Star Trek show in the internet. And so, yeah, we have Lieutenant Lepresti has beamed down already, and I know he is just waiting for the captain's log. So let's not waste any time and get right to it, my friends.
I always learn something.
Well, let's see if I don't disappoint tonight.
Okay.
Captain's log, stardate 2501.22. Wolf in the Fold, written by Robert Bloch and directed by Joseph Pevney. Wolf in the Fold was horror writer Robert Bloch's third and what would turn out to be his final script for Star Trek, following Cat's Paw and the first season's What Are Little Girls Made Of? As with the other assignments, he borrowed from his own stockpile of short stories, this time from 1943's Yours Truly, Jack the Ripper, originally published in Weird Tales pulp magazine. Weird Tales is where Conan was first published.
Mm-hmm.
According to Bloch, the idea of Jack the Ripper in space came from the two genes, Roddenberry and Kuhn. In the original outline, it was Sulu, not Scott, who is the amnesiac victim / murder on Argelius 2. It was associate producer Robert Justman, who, based on his regard for Jimmy Doohan's acting, wanted to change it to Scott. NBC's Stan Robertson agreed with Justman and, quote, "It would seem more feasible from a practical standpoint to utilize Mr. Scott as our suspect rather than Sulu, since not only is the former a more proficient actor, ouch, but a person in our series who I believe has not been given the exposure in our stories that his prominence on the crew denotes. Takei was out and Doohan was in." Roddenberry was always trying to get some sex into the episodes. He confided in Kuhn, "Let's establish that the nature of this place keeps women eternally young, beautiful, and remarkably busty. Perhaps hormones work better here. At any rate, let's cast and clothe in that direction with a vengeance. This place is remarkably peaceful because the women are beautiful and they screw a lot." Isn't that logical? Or if we can't be logical, let's at least be provocative, quote unquote.
My gosh.
Argelius 2 would be the perfect pleasure planet for weary spacemen. We see for the second time Kirk is wearing his wraparound tunic. After the issues in the Doomsday Machine with Shatner upset about Spock overshadowing him, Kuhn made sure Spock doesn't have much to do until the third act of this episode. If you notice, he's up on the ship and he's got nothing to do until they actually get up there. Guest star Charles Macaulay, formerly Landru from the first season, makes his second appearance here as Prefect Jarrus. A few years from now, 5 in fact, in 1972, he will bite William Marshall, who ends up playing Dr. Richard Daystrom, and turns him into Blackula in that wonderful blaxploitation horror film. John Fiedler, famous as the voice of Piglet in the Winnie the Pooh cartoons, is perfectly cast as Mr. Hegist Redjack / Jack the Ripper. His unassuming, gentle look is a good red herring. And that, my friends, is your Captain's Log for today.
I have to say that the Gene Roddenberry stuff there about the busty women, I was thinking to myself as I was rewatching the episode that I was like, it's a pleasure planet, or, you know, they but all the women are completely objectified. All the men are like, they're conservatively dressed in robes or whatever, but all the chicks are like got nothing on. I just thought that's kind of a one-sided pleasure planet, isn't it?
Speaking of pleasure planets, here's the man. Here comes the man who wants to live on Argelius too.
That's right.
Pleasure. Yes. I'm all about pleasure planets.
Yeah.
Argelius. Yeah, where you have pleasure, but you also get to murder women.
Ron, I was hoping you would be here for this. I got to read you. This was in the captain's log. Roddenberry was always trying to get sex into the episode, and he confided into Gene Kuhn, quote, "Let's establish that the nature of this place keeps women eternally young, beautiful, and remarkably busty. Perhaps hormones work better here. At any rate, let's cast and clothe in that direction with a vengeance. This place is remarkably peaceful because the women are beautiful and they screw a lot." Isn't that logical?
Yeah,
or if we keep it logical, let's at least be provocative. Unquote.
They screw a lot. How subtle. What's subtle innuendo?
Yeah, that's what Roddenberry said to his producer.
But don't you think this episode was a little on the erotic side for especially 1967 television? I mean, that opening dance sequence with the belly dancer or whatever.
Well, I think even the Green Orion girls right from the beginning.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, you're right.
That sexuality.
Yeah.
This is one of those episodes that the guy at NBC had been clamoring for. A, it takes place on another planet. It doesn't open with the Enterprise. It opens with a close-up of the dancing girl, and then she goes into her dance. And there's only like 3 episodes up to this point where they did that, and then they did that later on a little bit more, where they would open it without the Enterprise circling a planet.
Well, yeah. I mean, on top of that, you open up with the girl, but then you have the salivating Scotty and Kirk.
I know they're just leering at her.
Click, 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 click.
I mean, it's like you would think that every chance he got, Kirk could be redirecting the Enterprise back to that planet.
Yeah. Well,
let's go back to that other place. Screw shore leave.
Yeah.
I actually rewatched the episode last night. I don't know, Ron, if you did or not, but when they're leaving the dance place, right after Scotty takes a girl out, they're leaving. He goes up the steps. There's a blonde standing by the stairs there, and Kirk leans back around and checks her out and says something to her before he leaves. It's very subtle, but it's
I didn't notice that.
Yeah. And I was like, "You devil, you Jim."
Back here.
Did you notice that all the Argelians in the dance bar, or whatever it was, are all clad in shades of red?
Are they? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess that. Yeah.
Well, obviously for obvious effect for the portent of a killer being on the loose.
Mm-hmm.
I would imagine.
Clever.
Mm-hmm.
Did you guys also?
Who the prefect? The prefect was in another episode, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah. Charles Macaulay was Landru.
That's right. That's what it was.
Yeah.
Did you guys notice in this? And this has happened a couple times. Uhura was missing from this episode, and I wonder because she wouldn't have really had anything to do. They just didn't want to pay her.
Probably. According to my book, there was a lot of dialogue in this that a lot of people had, and they had to go through and cut a lot of that stuff out because it didn't really move the episode along. And it also cost them more money because now these people had speaking parts.
Huh. That's interesting, though. That it's like they could renegotiate a contract for Nichelle Nichols. But behind the scenes, they could say, "Well, we'll just cut her out of a few episodes and leave it out."
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what Eastwood did to his ex-wife. Like in the divorce settlement, Clint Eastwood with Sandra Locke, she demanded some kind of part of the divorce settlement was some kind of movie deal or something, and so he said, "Yeah, you'll get a movie." So she got a 3-picture deal in the divorce settlement, but the production company, he just told the production company not to fund it, so it could never get made. So he never.
Oh, is that right? Wow.
Yeah, he totally fucking pulled a fast one on her.
Nah, don't mess.
You don't mess with Clint.
No, you do
Yeah.
not mess with Clint.
I'll make your day.
You know, this episode has all the elements that I like in a story, or I mean, you got the mystery, the whodunit kind of aspect to it, and I love anything with Jack the Ripper. That's always been to me, even as a kid. I remember reading. There was a reader. You remember Reader's Digest, right? Where they would give like excerpts from books or whatever, and you could read like we call it the Reader's Digest version, right? And there was a story in there about Jack the Ripper, and I don't remember if it was I think it was historical, like nonfiction, but it described these just heinous murders and stuff, you know. And as a kid, it just like it fascinated me, but terrified me at the same time. I think it's one of the scariest things because it really happened and it was never solved, right? And so anytime I see a movie or a book or even a comic book that deals with Jack the Ripper, I'm immediately mesmerized by it. And so, you know, you had that element in here, you have the mystery element in it, and you know, the high melodrama. It just had, this episode really had all the earmarks of stuff that, you know, engages me. So
I really like the idea that Jack the Ripper was an entity that, you know, would go, you know, through the universe to different planets and feed off the fear of the populace that he would create by killing people and stuff. And he went by different names on different planets.
You could almost, yeah, you can almost argue that the entity in Day of the Dove was the same entity in a way.
Oh yeah.
Because well, yeah, that was feeding off the anger and the conflict between,
right?
Yeah.
It's interesting. It's interesting they had an opportunity to tie that in. I'd never thought of that till now, but that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
you should have tied that in.
Yeah, there's a lot of themes that run through these episodes, and I know that, you know, they tried not to do that. Like in this one here, one of the things in the original script was that Kirk was going to defeat the computer by, you know, outwitting it, you know, and we'd already seen that a couple of times. He did it with Landru. He did it with there was another one. And then it comes up later on again in the Ultimate Computer and all that kind of stuff, where he outsmarts, or the Changeling, which is the next episode, where he outsmarts it. And DC Fontana says, you know, we got this theme here, you know, we got to avoid that. So they came up with the idea of giving it an equation that would make the computer, you know, just keep working and working and working and force the entity out of it.
That's a very smart solution to that.
Yeah, it was very clever.
And she was really great. I mean, DC Fontana was so smart. And when I read her notes on these scripts and how she could go through it and say, this doesn't work because of blank, 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 and she'd come up with a solution for things that was really great. You know, she really at this point is not getting the credit for all the stuff she's actually adding into these episodes.
Well, that's why she went by DC, isn't it? Because she felt like she wouldn't get a fair shake if she went by a female name or something.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that was true with a lot of novelists too. You know, they would go by initials because there was, you know, a certain amount of. It is sad, you know, that it just the work just can't stand on its own.
Yeah.
Different time though. That's for sure.
But you know how a lot of women in comics, if you read their stories, you can tell they're women.
Yes.
You don't get that from DC Fontana.
No, you know who's really good at that was Louise.
Do you have any examples? Sorry, Aaron. Any examples of other female writers where you can tell?
Comics?
Yeah, most of them.
I don't really pay attention to it that much. So I'm just curious if you have any examples.
I'm not going to name
specific.
Names.
No name names, but I mean specific story ideas that where you can tell.
It's always in the relationships.
Okay.
Of how they handle the relationships, particularly in superhero comics, which are basically male fantasy
things,
and you know, they get into a lot of, you know, female emotions about how writing men in how they're interacting and what they're feeling and thinking, you know.
I thought Louise Simonson was the opposite of that. I thought she did a really great job of writing superhero comics and really understanding who the audience was and how to approach it.
Yes. Louise was a great one.
Now
Yep.
that you mention it, I would say, looking back at Ann Nesenti's run on Daredevil, I could see some.
Now, I was going to mention Ann Nesenti, yep, as a positive one there.
There's always like a relationship thing going on with either Karen Page or even Typhoid Mary. There's always this sexual sort of undercurrent with him.
Yep.
And a lot of focus on that. So yeah, I could see, see that.
Sure. I agree, Lynn. Joe Duffy was very good at writing adventure tales, boy stories, that type of stuff.
Well, it's just a matter of, I mean, we're getting off track here, but it's just a matter of you knowing who your audience is and not trying to interject your personal feelings about certain things in there. You just understand who your audience is and then how to write towards
Well,
that
that's
audience.
what ruined Star Wars, is because they forgot that very simple thing.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. Now, we talked a little bit about this in the back room before we went on, but I think we should bring it up that there's a couple rough spots, shall we say, in this episode. And one of them is the exposition at the very beginning about Scotty. It was, you described it in the back room, Graham, as being awkward. And it was.
It was clunky.
It was clunky. That was the word. And it was like them talking about, oh, he could resent women, but he, and just this whole thing. And you're just like, do we really need any of this? I mean,
first off, it's phony baloney psychology, which that doesn't even hold water. I mean, he was injured in an accident that a woman caused. That now he's going to resent women for that? No, that's stupid, you know.
But I mean, the concussion was valid,
right?
And I kept thinking, every time I see this episode, I think, now, granted, there's budgetary concerns and everything else, but if we'd opened with just like a minute scene of Scotty being cleared to go on shore leave, with the doctor and saying, okay, how's your head? You know, when you hit that bulkhead, you could have done that in a more natural way and then just picking him up down on the planet. And
even faster, open it on the planet, have a bandage on his head, and then they can address it.
Yeah, how's that? You're having any?
We know it's recent because he's got a bandage on his head.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So that was the only part of the show, and then you talked about kind of blowing the red herring a little bit, giving clues about Piglet being the killer.
Yeah,
that were unnecessary.
Piglet.
Yeah. We're going to refer to John Fiedler as Piglet tonight.
True, he is the voice, isn't he?
Oh yeah. I
didn't even think of that.
I was saying to Aaron before you came on, Ron, how he was perfectly cast because he's so unassuming. And he's got that he's got that Piglet voice. Nobody would expect him to be a killer, and yet they telegraph it when the ensign or the nurse is beaming down with the special tricorder, and he's just walking out the door, and he stops. The camera is focused on him. He turns to watch her beam down, and then after she does, he just kind of nods to her. She nods to him. Then he turns and walks out. That pause right there is like a big reveal. It's like
focus on him as something central to the story.
Yes,
right.
Yeah, and so they telegraph that he is actually our guy, when in fact it would have
been
he
has
cool.
something to do with it.
Yeah. Sure. It would have been so much cooler if they revealed it another way.
Yeah,
because he is so typecast as a Casper Milquetoast, you wouldn't expect him to be this murderer, killing with a knife.
And yet, when you look at some of the murderers in history, they do kind of. Well, I guess you can't really typecast any of them, can you? I mean,
they're always the neighbors always say the same thing, though, right? I never would have expected him.
Yeah.
One of the things I did like about this episode also was when they're on the ship in the third act, and Kirk is questioning everybody, right? And it gets more and more far-fetched, right? Well, what if it's an entity? What if it did this? What if it, and Hengist keeps objecting, but his objections don't necessarily make him look guilty. They're logical objections to where this thing is going.
Mhm.
Well, and they're directed at Scotty quite a bit.
Yeah.
I mean, he really is trying to pin Scotty for everything.
Right. But that's what he would do, even if he was just a prosecutor, because he's like, this is ghosts and goblins. It's fantasy, you know.
Yeah.
And I know something about the law, and this is pure speculation.
Don't you think that this should be handled in an official way?
That's a very good.
It will be handled in an official way, since I'm the highest official in the land.
He always was pushing, but he never pushed too hard, you know, so that he gave himself away.
Well, what gave him away was when he didn't want to do the test.
Right. Well, at that point, you knew.
Okay.
Because they were like, wasn't that after the murder weapon?
This has gone too far. You know.
Yeah, he goes, you're from Rigel 4.
It's gone too far. Yeah.
He goes, you're from Rigel 4.
I really like the idea of getting them all juiced up, you know, and then, you know, when they walk into the room, when Kirk and Spock walk into the room after everybody's been inoculated, and the prefect Jarvis, he turns his back to you. Now, okay, you know he's somebody to watch now because he's not doing anything. His back is just standing there to us, and then he's talking with Bones. Has everybody gotten the shot? Oh, everybody but me, you, and Spock. Well, you better give yourself one. And they go through that whole little thing, and then he tells Jarvis to turn around, and then he's like, die, all of you die. You know, it's like, again, they telegraphed it. You can see, you know, he's the guy.
I would say this though. I think you might be prejudiced a little bit because you've seen it so many times. But the very first time I remember seeing that episode, you're focused on Kirk because he's talking, and Jarvis turns, but he's kind of off to the side. So if you're not really paying attention,
that's true.
You don't really notice.
Yeah,
at least true. I didn't.
Yeah,
I mean, now I know because we've seen it so many times. It's obvious.
Yeah,
you know, but
I forget that I've been watching it for 60 years.
Yeah,
whatever.
That's the problem with a lot of these episodes.
Yeah,
we know too much.
Yeah. We're not really watching or listening to the episode. We're watching everything else.
Yeah, exactly.
At this point,
think about how much time I've wasted of my life watching Star Trek episodes.
You wouldn't say that if your meeting with Shatner had gone better.
That's true. You're just
I have thought that before I met him. Like, man, think about how much I've watched that show. It's like over and over and over and over and over.
Well, but
you wasted reading comics.
Yeah.
What's that?
How much time have you wasted reading comics?
Actually, you know what, dude? Once they started working, I didn't read them at all.
We talked about that before we came on.
Yeah, I did the same thing. As soon as I started working steady, I had no idea what was going on except my script and when it was due.
And I would know little things because they had like Wizard magazine, and that would come to my door. Or I would always get comps like from Marvel, so I kind of I might leaf through them, but I never really. Like, that was the whole trade-off. Everything in life is a trade-off, and the trade-off is once you start working in it, you're the man behind the curtain, like in Oz. It's no longer this magical journey you go in into.
You're not looking at it from the same perspective.
Because I used to take
Simonson's, breaking it down.
Right. I used to take Simonson's store and go sit under a tree in the park and just escape into it.
Right.
Just give myself over to the escape. But once you work in it, that's the trade-off is you don't do that anymore.
Right. Now you're looking at it. Why did he choose this angle?
And you realize that it was, it's weird how the mind works like that, how it's like a form of hypnosis, really. I mean, because your mind gives itself over to that, the same way hypnotist, you have to give yourself over to the hypnotist. You have to give yourself over to the escape. And once you know what's going on behind, and there's word balloons and there's people behind it, even though they're written in there, you still, you can still escape if you're not part of the creation of it.
Sure. Right. Sure. I'm glad you said that because I felt that way for a long time. And I was like, am I the only one who feels like this? But maybe it is just a side effect of actually being in the industry and producing the books. They lose the luster and like you said, the magic, the imagination they had when you were a reader.
Yeah, it's like the Wizard of Oz. All the smoke and the lights, you know.
Now the fun is in the creation process, not in the absorption of reading the final product.
Every now and then,
new stuff.
Yeah, I don't know if it's the same for you guys, but every now and then I can look back at something myself I've done decades ago, and I can escape a little bit into it now. A little.
Yeah.
Bit.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Because I forgot that I drew it, and there was a couple of things I looked at not too long ago where I completely forgot I drew these particular pages and and I couldn't remember doing them. So I was
able
to
reevaluate your work too, don't you?
Yeah.
Like when you first did it and closed it and you looked at it when it was first published, you're like, oh Jesus, why did I do this? Why did I do that? I hate the fucking thing. And you throw it away. Now I look back on stuff 30 years ago and I'm like, hey, you know what? That's pretty good.
That wasn't as bad as I thought.
I did the same thing.
Yeah.
Sure. Definitely.
That's
cool.
I
mean, I do remember I always had fun doing the storytelling anyway. I was never a style guy per se. Mm-hmm. For me, it was about the action, the adventure, and creating a little movie on the page where your eye goes through it and creates this actual world of, however you get there, but not through. For me, it wasn't about style. It was just about camera shots and angles. Mm-hmm. Framing and composition in the panels and stuff. That was fun for me. So I can look back at that and appreciate it more than I used to. I still look at how far I have come in my figure drawing and things like that. That I could see. I'm like, oh God, why did I draw that rib cage out to here or whatever, Right. But the storytelling I can appreciate more than I did back then.
Oh, so. Sure. So there was a sequence in here, which I didn't realize until I was reading about it, is when the entity is now in the computer system and Kirk and Spock get into the elevator. The way it was written was that the elevator doors closed trying to cut Spock in half. And then the elevator was doing a dead drop, and it was going to, they were going to crush and die that way.
You imagine they actually did that because Nimoy wanted out of the show.
Right.
Okay, Leonard, we're going to cut you in half with the elevator.
Yeah. Harrison Ford would have been perfectly fine with that, but but the way they angled it and stuff, it never came across that way. It's like the door closed behind him. It never seemed like it was a threat to cut him from the angle that they shot it.
So many things.
The elevator drop, obviously, that was a threat.
I thought the closing door was just sort of an annoyance or an indication that they were in charge now. And of course, I didn't read the backstory. I didn't know he was originally supposed to get. I didn't get that sense that, oh my gosh, he almost died there until the thing, until the elevator dropped.
I would have thought Spock would have had a better sense that Piglet was the guy, with his, he's, because you remember that scene in Omega Glory where Spock, and it was really cool the way they used, Spock was getting into the mind of one of the
chicks. Yeah.
Oh, the chick. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it cuts to his eyes. They look kind of demonic. Like they keep looking at Spock's eyes. Really cool, I thought.
Yeah.
And I would, you'd think he might have been a little more like that with this character, like sensing that there's something going on inside Piglet,
Although Spock doesn't really have a good read on emotions.
Yeah.
So, he's a facts guy, you give him hard facts and he can solve a mystery, but he can't get into the mind of a character, I don't think, of a person and figure it out.
Is he the type of character that would intrude on somebody's, thoughts like that without proper evidence to support it, And he didn't get that evidence until, the murders were one solar year ago on the, I keep wanting to call it Red Jack 4, but the name
Argelius? Argelius.
No,
Argelius 2. Oh.
What? With the planet that Piglet was from originally.
Oh.
It was
yeah, it starts with an R, but I keep wanting to say Red Jack.
Rigel.
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 Yeah, Rigel 4. And didn't they use Rigel in other episodes too?
I think so.
I
But
think
maybe
it
not
was
Rigel
in
4, but it was Rigel something.
Rigel 7. Wasn't that in
That
one
one
of the
sounds familiar.
early episodes? What one was it?
Yeah, I know they used it before. I can't remember the episode though.
I keep thinking of Mud's Women or something.
Lynn Green says Rigel. What is that? Is that 6 or
4.
Rigel?
That's 4.
Rigel.
Oh, okay. Oh, she's talking about the planet. Yeah, the question I was just asking. Yeah, thank you, Lynn. But yeah, I know they used Rigel before. Rigel 9 says Sean Allen.
Rigel 7 in Mud's Women. Rigel 7 in the Cage. Okay. Yeah, the Cage. That's right. That's where Rigel was.
Yeah, I was going to say that too. It was like
Yeah.
one of the earlier episodes. I knew it was.
Well, how many Rigels are there for crying? There's a whole solar system of Rigels.
Well,
there's
there's at least
11
because Rigel 11 and Mud's Women.
My God.
Oh, so it was.
No, Rigel 12. There's at least 12 because
right. I was right. It was a Rigel and Mud's Women. That's what I thought.
Man, so there's a whole solar system out there where they just said, let's just name them all Rigel, and we don't have to come up with any difficult names here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When they found the ensign, who's supposed to do the psycho tricorder, did you notice that she had all those blood stains on her back when she's laying on the ground there?
That was added, wasn't it?
Was that it? Was that an effect that was added?
Because if you watch the Gorn,
I don't recall a lot of blood on the.
Yeah, because if you look at the Gorn episode, the remastered one, he has diamonds and blood on his chest that wasn't there in the original episode. So I don't know if those were there in the original or not.
Oh, interesting.
Someone just reminded us also the Doomsday Machine was headed towards the Rigel system.
Well, I do know that they inserted stains on Scotty's crotch after he woke up out of the.
Oh, when he was in the alleyway after he.
Yeah. He had some stains down there, so he clearly.
he was responsible for something. That's for sure.
But he couldn't remember. That's the downside.
Look at Lynn Green in the chat educating us. He says Rigel is a trinary star system. That's why there's so many Rigels.
Lynn knows her stuff.
I guess so.
All right, Lynn.
But
you got to come on the show.
The dancer's body didn't have any blood on it.
No, it didn't.
That's why it struck me that the blue suit had the like individual red stripes as if a knife had gone in.
Well, it made sense. It would make sense to do that,
Sure.
As opposed to, maybe it's just death by strangulation or something. But
right.
Well,
but not do it for the dancer.
Jack the Ripper was a.
Well, I wonder if because she was basically naked with very low. They would have been pouring blood all over her skin, and maybe that was just too graphic.
Yeah. I'm sure that was it. That NBC probably said, "Whoa, we can't have that."
Yeah.
Imagine how much. Well, never mind. Imagine how much fun it would be applying that blood to.
Yeah.
Anyway,
that girl who was the dancer was also in Alexander the Great. That pilot that Shatner had made.
She was in that.
Yeah, she was in that.
Oh man, now you have to go back and look.
Yeah, and she said to him, "Do you remember me from Alexander the Great?" And he's like, "Oh yeah,
I thought. Yeah.
Oh, I remember.
Oh, I remember.
We worked with the chick from Elena Troy too, and another thing.
Oh, yeah, she was on Broadway with him in World Susie Wong.
Susie Wong, right?
Yeah, Franz Nguyen.
Franz Nguyen, yeah.
Yeah.
Nguyen.
I think it's Nguyen is how it sounds like.
The G is silent.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's pronounced win though too.
Nguyen.
Yeah, or just win. Depends on. We're gonna have to get someone in here to give us.
Well, it's spelled just like Tom Nguyen. The artist used to work for DC up in the Minnesota area.
I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, he spelled it. I think it's Korean.
Sounds like it.
Toxic Josh says it's win.
So I'm going to cat wrangle here a little bit, but one of my favorite moments in this episode is when they after they inject Piglet with the whatever, and he's like, die, kill you, and he's laughing, and they throw him on the transporter, and he's like, deep space, widest possible dispersion. And he goes, I'll do it, and he's, what's it called, Mr. Powell or whatever.
Yeah.
And then he's like, Spock, you do it. And Spock is one of those, shoves him out of the way. And then he says,
he goes like,
what do you have to push me, Mr. Spock? I gotten around to it.
Yes, I've gotten around to it. I love Kirk when Spock tells him, you know what, you wanted some vacation time. Why don't you take this? And he goes, good idea. It's Mr. Spock. I know this place.
I know.
And then Spock's looking at him like, and the other two are like, I know the place. Let's go.
Let's go.
Let's go. In your condition? And then he goes, alone?
Yeah.
And then off they go. But I think it's funny, that Kirk was willing to leave the ship in the hands of all those drunks.
I know. That's what I was thinking too. This episode, he's actually going to take him and Spock, or considering taking him and Spock down to the planet when everybody else is
going to run the place.
Wow.
He'd be standing on the planet. It would be just like in Star Trek 3. He'd see this flame going down in the atmosphere.
And he'd say, Bones,
what have I done?
What have I done?
What have I done? Well, you left a bunch of drunks in charge, Captain.
Yeah, they'd all be plastered on the planet too watching this shit.
Well, it just shows that how powerful Kirk's drive is to mate with alien women. He almost considered doing it, but then he's like, no, I can't.
Well, you could look at it a different way too. His drives to alien women, isn't that kind of what sheep herders do with their sheep?
I beg your pardon?
Because they get desperate. So they'll do anything.
But he didn't do anything. He remained responsible because, okay, I'm the captain. I got to stay here. I'm the only guy not blasted right now. But I mean, come on, what is Sulu doing? I mean, they're probably in a decayed orbit right at that point, and he doesn't even know it yet because Sulu's up there twirling around in his chair going, right. I don't know who we're supposed to be afraid of.
What's the button do?
I think it would have been better had they not used Piglet's voice when, if they made it a little more demonic and monstrous sounding instead of that corny cartoon voice he's got. Die, you all die. Sounds like a little elf.
I thought it was really
murderous creepy. Elf. What?
I thought it was really creepy. When
I like it is. I'm not saying it's not. I just feel like because if the lore of Jack the Ripper, I mean, even the name Jack the Ripper, he's called the Ripper for a reason. It wasn't just a guy who murdered women. He literally filleted them.
Yeah, he eviscerated them. Yeah.
Yeah, like spread them apart and disemboweled them. And it was absolutely evil and horrific. You know? And I feel like if you're going to use Jack the Ripper, but I mean, for that time, maybe for television, they probably had to pull back. I wonder how far they must have talked about it. How far can we go here making this, effect using the Jack the Ripper theme? How far can we go in the murderous direction and show just what a monster that fucker really was?
Mm-hmm.
That's why I think maybe, I get the visual of him hiding in the most unassuming identity of, form. But for the evil itself, when it finally comes out, I think it would have been more effective, in my opinion. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, sure.
If I had my way of doing the show, I would have gone a little farther with it, not made it
creepier.
Yeah, much more to really drive the point home of what Jack the Ripper.
Do you think that in 1967 TV standards that would have been,
Yeah, well, that's what I was saying. They must have had that discussion, because they all knew what Jack the Ripper did, and they're going to use the theme of Jack the Ripper for this episode, Wolf in the Fold. It's even beyond a wolf. I mean, this was a guy who disemboweled women for some completely evil, sick, twisted, not just knifing them and putting the knife in someone else's hand. He really you know, it was
Well,
beyond horrific.
They definitely cartoonized it, you know, just
Yeah.
and watered it down to simply stabbing, right? Which is
Exactly.
bad
That's
enough,
my
but
point. It's like,
yeah,
because then he just becomes another murderer, you know what I mean? But
Mhm.
Jack the Ripper is unique in history for him being really of his time, like just something that was so beyond horror that, you
Right.
know, we still can't almost comprehend.
yeah.
This
Right.
guy lurking around the streets and then luring women in, and
Yeah. And they
doing
were
what he
all prostitutes.
in that era, you know, and gaslit, you know,
Yeah.
lamps.
Victorian age. Yeah.
Yeah, it was so horrific into the community, and you know, so I and they tried to do a little bit of that with the you know, when Scotty's outside in the alleyway and stuff, they try to make it look kind of Londony or whatever.
With the fog and everything.
Yeah.
I thought that sequence before they go to commercial, where they look up and they see Mr. Scott up against the wall, and the way he's angled up against the wall, and his head is like, his eyes are rolled back, and his hand is down, and it's holding that curved, bloody knife.
Yeah.
Was it was so cool. I used it.
That's where you can see that's
intro.
where yeah. That's what, with that knife, is where they, you know, they really try to give the idea of what that knife could do,
Mhm.
to allude to what Jack the Ripper really was. I just feel like it could have, if they could have just pushed the envelope a little bit more, it would be better. Because, you know, and I'll say this, I do like the Hammer film sort of feel about it. You know, it's
I
sort of
never thought of that, but it does have kind of that vibe, doesn't it?
yeah, it has a Hammer horror film to it. And that was around that time that Christopher Lee was doing the Dracula movies, I think, maybe a little bit after that. But
Yeah. Well, he started in 58.
yeah, so he was
And so
around,
they were still going on till the mid 70s.
right?
Yeah.
So you can see he was
73,
heavily
72.
influenced by that.
Yeah.
So
We had to be aware of it, obviously. So
I really appreciated that part of it. And the thing I liked about it is that this is why Star Trek was so great too, is you could take something like that, like a Jack the Ripper story. It's not a science fiction story by any stretch of the imagination, other than that this entity went out in space.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really science fiction. It's a horror story set in the Star Trek universe.
Yeah.
Which is what was so great about that show.
Yeah.
You should take all these different themes, you know,
Yeah.
Bread and Circuses or the Omega Glory, any of these themes, you know, and just, you know, that basically these contexts all fit within this framework of Star Trek, which was brilliant about it. Like the Wild Wild West was still, even though they had some technological cool stuff in there, it was still the Wild West.
Yeah. James Bond in the West. Yeah.
Yeah, you couldn't take these different themes, and I mean they tried, but it was unique to Star Trek.
Yeah.
Same with Twilight Zone, you know, had, you know, it was a plethora of different ideas. But setting it in the Star Trek universe is what was so great about it.
Mm-hmm.
No, it is. I mean, because you can take, you know, we do the same thing in comics and everything else. Is like you can take the most outlandish story and put it into a sci-fi setting or a fantasy setting or something, and it makes it just instantly more interesting because of those extra elements that are there.
Yeah.
You know, it's like you said, you know, we've all seen a Roman situation where people are gladiators or sent to get killed or whatever, but now you put it on TV in a different planet where that's possible, and it becomes a whole different thing. And this weird combination of Roman culture and technology. I guess we're getting way ahead of ourselves for bread and circuses.
It also becomes an indictment on modern television, which is what, you know, he was going for. You know,
the reason it works for Wolf in the Fold too is that, you know, well, this particular episode is that, and the theme of Jack the Ripper is because the very thing Graham said before is that they never found out who he was.
Right.
You know, so it was one of those things like that evil, because there was no identity to it, no human face to that evil, it became something, you know, more like a true entity of evil, as if, because we couldn't put a human face on it. So it worked in the Star Trek context, because where did it go? Where did this evil go? This evil, you know, obviously whoever did it died, but in that time they couldn't find it. Where did it go? That person was probably still lurking around, but just stopped doing it, because those murders happened for about couple months, I think.
I don't think it was even that long.
It was like a month or 1 or 2 months back in 1891 or 18 around
Yeah,
there.
it's been a long time since I read that stuff. But yeah, it was a very short period of time. It just started and then it ended.
Yeah, it ended very fast. So the guy just. So where did that entity go? So it works in this context because it was, went out into another planet or whatever. So
all the stuff they brought up during the trial, I thought made sense. He goes, he killed at will in the most populated center in the world at the time, and yet was undetected. Doesn't sound very likely, and it doesn't. It sounds mysterious. It sounds, spooky and like demonic or something. So maybe we're not. So it made perfect sense. I'm just agreeing with you, Ron, but it just makes perfect sense that you could take it in that direction, and it becomes very believable. In that
Jack the Ripper started in August and it stopped in November of 1888.
Yeah, it was a couple of months or something.
Yeah, August, September, October, so 3 months.
And how many women did he kill?
1890 or something, or 1880.
Let's see.
Or 1880.
He murdered at least 5 women, all prostitutes.
So basically about one a month, a little bit, one every 3 weeks or something.
The canonical 5 victims of Jack the Ripper were murdered over a period of 12 weeks. So there's 5 of them.
Man.
In 12 weeks. Okay. Wow.
4 women. Jesus.
5 women.
Crazy.
I was at a homestead.
And we're still talking about it 140 years later.
I used to go up to Vermont when I was a little boy. I used to go to Vermont with my father. I won't get into the personal details of my familial relationship with my legal father, let's put it that way. And we would have to go on the weekend up to, with him. And one time I was up there, I remember, and I went, and it was a homestead where people would come through and stay, pay a little money, and they would stay in the rooms of my grandfather's house in Vermont. It was a real recluse town up in Vermont somewhere. But I remember one time I was in one of the rooms, and I opened the closet, and I went to the closet, and I found a stack of paper, and I found these drawings in there that somebody had left there, maybe passing through when they stayed there. And they were all horrific drawings of swords going through women's vaginas up through their mouths and stuff. That was a little
really,
yeah.
Jesus.
So like tons of sick fuck drawings, and I remember just being like in shock, and it never left me, obviously.
Yeah.
And I just remember getting this feeling like what I was looking at was this. I was in the same room that some fucking murderous serial killer was in at some point, maybe never got caught, but there were all these drawings there of that, And I was
and now you draw Berserker. Coincidence?
Don't connect those dots, Graham.
Who can say?
That's not me. That's the other guy who writes.
Oh my gosh.
Were you ever on Rigel?
Hey, lots of people are from Rigel. It's not a crime.
This room right here is on Rigel. I'm broadcasting from another planet in this room.
All right, let's give some ratings here.
All right.
Aaron.
Well, if it wasn't for the awkward opening dialogue and that whole sort of contrived beginning, I might give it a 10. I love this episode, so I'm going to give it a 9. I absolutely love this episode.
Wow. Okay.
It's fun in the creepiest sense of the word, but I just love this episode.
Okay.
This one's a tough one for me because I do like the episode overall.
Mm-hmm.
Piglet's,
Poor Piglet.
Prefect and Piglet, and I do like I said, I really like the Hammer film feel of it because I always those films always have such a certain energy and mood.
The
to them.
seance scene, we didn't even discuss that.
Yeah,
The seance scene was
right
really
there.
cool.
It was creepy. That was a creepy
where she starts
scene.
going off, Red Jack.
Yeah, and she's like, oh,
Yeah.
you know, and she's
Yeah,
like,
and then the lights go out, and then you hear that blood curdling scream. You know, that was really well done.
and that her husband there is like, you know, he's been witness to this before, where she's, you know, done this sort of mysticism. So I really enjoyed it for that. So it's weird because as a science fiction episode, you know, it's not really science fiction, but I love the theme of, it's like reading a good novel. That episode was like reading a novel more than anything. I would give it that's tough, but I do think they could have pushed the envelope more to really drive the point home of Jack the Ripper some more.
Yeah, if they were able
as horrific as they tried to make it, his Piglet's voice and stuff, it became a little cartoonish for me. You know, because I did know the story of Jack the Ripper even back then, and you know, and especially after what I just told you about those drawings I found.
Right.
You know, so I mean, for me, the reality of what that fucker did. So I'm going to knock off maybe a couple of points for the where they made it a little cartoony with Piglet. I'll give it an 8. An 8.
8. And what
Everything
was
else I liked. What's that?
What was Aaron's?
I was a 9, but you have to understand this is the type of material that I really like. So I'm not a great objective observer of an episode like this, but I give it a 9.
Okay, I'm gonna go with I'm actually gonna be the low ball here. I'm going with 7 on this.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I could see that too.
Yeah,
I couldn't go that well
it's
on that.
a lot of drag in the opening. The dance goes on too long.
I agree. I agree.
Before we actually get into the story.
On that though, I think they're really trying to drive the point home. The dance goes on too long, and it really pushed the sexuality aspect, which is what part of the psychosis of Jack the Ripper was. It was very, you know, it was all prostitutes, and I think they were really trying to, you know, push that. You know, there's something, he had a serious problem with the sexuality of prostitutes, clearly, and I think they're probably trying to drive that point home. I mean, again, yeah, I could see 7's a good score. I mean, for me, it's such a different episode than all the rest of them, really, in its own way. It kind of lives on its own. Like I said, it's very like reading a novel, Star Trek novel.
It's sort of a cross genre because you've got a mystery, you've got a courtroom drama, and you've got a bit of horror and sci-fi. So sort of a little bit of all of that.
What other episode has there been in that whole 3 seasons that was horrific? You know, murder, you know, like that. There wasn't. There's nothing that really, other than like, again, Day of the Dove, where there was an evil entity making everybody go to war. You know, in Day of the Dove, it was more like the media. You know, it was like the mainstream media fucking with people's brains and getting them to fight against each other.
Right.
It was evil, but you know, this was pure, palpable, just evil, murderous.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, as far as like, I think Mantrap might be the only other one because you had a monster that was, but the monster was somewhat sympathetic too, whereas Red Jack is not. He's just just a horrible creature, and they had no compunction whatsoever to scatter its atoms across the universe.
Yeah, and ultimately they couldn't kill it. They just had to remove it from the Enterprise.
Right.
You know, so that thing is still out there. You know.
Well, Kirk said it was into a million atoms, and that it would eventually die like that because they set the transporter on a wide dispersal, so it breaks all your atoms down and then reconfigures them. But in this case, it spread them out. Yeah,
just dispersed them.
Yeah, which makes the transporter one of the craziest weapons that
like how, I mean, is it possible? I mean, can you do it to an entity that is just energy like that?
Yeah.
It wasn't a physical entity, just other than an inhabited.
Well, if you're breaking everything down to its molecules, you would be able to, since it was contained. it'd be like taking you know, an entity, putting it in a jar, and then if you just dissolved it and spread it out. I mean, if it was, how could you contain it to get it
Well,
on that form?
yeah, the way I always looked at it, is that it was a sentient energy. It wasn't like because even molecules are a physical manifestation. Energy is different. I mean, it's
Well,
right.
that's true.
You know, so to me, it was like, you know, it's, you know, when we think of God and the devil, you know, my interpretation of the devil is an energy that is so potent that it's sentient of itself. It's pure evil that exists to do evil for its own sake, and it becomes sentient. It's sentient for that reason, and that's kind of the way I look at Jack the Ripper. Is like, you know, the evil that inhabited that man was a sentient thing that took over him. You know what I mean? I can't, and that's kind of what it alludes to in this episode, is that this evil.
Well, I think,
how do you disperse atoms of that? You can't.
Yeah, but I think that was just give us the happy ending for the
of
network,
course, yeah, absolutely.
right? You know, because obviously it would still be out there and it would reform and it would go on its merry way. And
well, the universe is made up of positive and negative, you know, so it's part of, you know, the whole. I mean, not to get religious or spiritual, but it's, you know, the idea of your soul being of a certain consistency, so it gravitates towards one or the other of those, the two energy, the energy and polar energies in the universe. You know, if your soul is, it's like a dirty rag, you throw it in the dirty rag bin. If it's a clean rag, you put it in the clean rag bin. And if your soul is clean, you rejoin with the positive energy in the universe. And that's, you know, the whole aspect of being good versus being evil. And that energy is just there. It's part of what makes it's part of what runs the universe. It's not, you know, so the Jack the Ripper energy is just something that would just go back and then reform. And in my opinion, that's just the way I look at it. So
the writers thought,
I hear you.
the writers thought differently.
Yeah.
They said you could kill it. So
it was a nice way to tie it up. And,
yeah.
Lynn Green brings out a good point about Star Trek 2, and I don't want to be bringing up something that makes Star Trek 2 look negative, but
I will. I'll bring it up.
She said they could have dispersed the Genesis device with the transporter, and it would never.
Let me bring that up, Aaron.
Still the greatest Star Trek movie. Sorry.
I like what Lynn says. Hey, Lynn, when you said I'm going with Spock didn't mind meld with Scotty. Yeah, that's kind of what my point was earlier about Spock. I think he'd be able to figure it out, you know.
Well, they also could have gone right to that psycho tricorder instead of doing the whole questioning people was kind of a waste of time when they could have just gone to the psycho tricorder and got, well, at least they would have known Scotty was innocent. They may not have known who was guilty.
Yeah, they couldn't have figured out.
The thing with me and Spock, though, I always looked at Spock as like, you know, for me, Spock was always, you know, as much as I loved Kirk, Spock to me was the superhuman hero that I always wanted to explore. You know, he was almost somebody who was always indefeatable. You know, like you couldn't defeat Spock because he had just too many cool powers. You know, he really was the coolest thing on the show in some ways. You know, so that's why I loved it when he could do all that mind stuff and everything. It just made him really, really, really interesting.
See, I would argue that Spock is cool because of Kirk. When you get episodes that are Spock centric, he's not so cool.
Really?
Yeah. In my opinion.
I don't know about that. I don't know if I agree. I'd have to think about it. It's a debate for another time. I'd have to think about it. Really. Yeah. We'll definitely talk about that another time.
Yeah. There might be fisticuffs.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Spock's brain.
You were not Morg.
Brain and brain. What is brain?
Can we stay out of the third season for as long as possible, please?
That one's going to be fun. That one's going to be fun.
Yeah, it's all fours across the board.
Yeah.
Though I think Anna will go lower.
Yeah, well,
I'll go lower.
Anna giving Decker, you know, giving
Doomsday Machine.
She runs the risk. She rocks that tightrope of falling into the abyss of not being taken seriously. Sorry, Anna.
I'm curious what she would have.
I get her points, but it's like, you know, to give the Doomsday Machine a 4 is like.
Yeah, that one was a solid. I think we all gave it 10s, right?
Yeah. Well, 9.5 or 10. I give it a 10. I think Ron gave it a 9.5.
Yeah, it's up there.
Yeah.
Just to give himself a little wiggle room.
I mean, I give myself a wiggle room. I could be talked into depending on the points that are made, but that point that she made, I can't. I'm the opposite of. I thought he delivered that performance on purpose that way. So
Yeah, I thought it was.
I agree. I thought that episode was really about him, and William Wyndham carried that episode more than anybody, and
absolutely
he sold it really well.
More than Shatner could have. I mean, the way every time he was on screen, you were transfixed.
His performance was layered. There was more than just him reading the lines. There was stuff behind what he was saying in every situation because it was different. And he took it very seriously, which a lot of times stuff like that, guys just phone it in.
Did you ever see the interview with him before he died? He was really old, and they were interviewing him about Star Trek, and he was talking about how happy and tickled he was that people thought of his performance so well in that.
Yeah.
And you could see it really meant a lot to him, because I think he's one of those actors who had a career and stuff, but never really got maybe never reached the.
Yeah. He was a longtime character actor in millions of TV series and stuff, but never, rose to really star level.
Yeah. And I think the Star Trek fans and the Star Trek universe made him feel that way.
Yeah.
It made him really feel appreciated, his acting chops,
Well, the thing is, in that, if science fiction had not been so looked down upon at that time, getting an Emmy nomination was just a miracle for something like a show like that. And he really, I was serious when I walked in. The first thing I said was he deserved an Emmy nomination for that role. And he really did.
Yeah.
But, no one was looking at science fiction and going, oh, that's deep acting, but he had a really layered performance.
Yeah. It's a complete opposite for me of what she was saying. It's like, no, I think it probably even told him, you're on the edge, man. You are losing it, and you really need to drive that point home. And he knew it. You could see it in his face. I mean, there was not 1 ounce of you not believing in his insane that thing drove him crazy at his death. For his death, like the look in his eyes. And it's weird because he pulled that off, and it was just a camera on him. In reality, it's just a camera like this in front of him, and he's just in front of the camera, and there's not 1 ounce of unbelievability in that performance. You just really believe he's gone mad.
Yeah, he displayed like PTSD when that was something that wasn't even diagnosed yet,
Right.
That's the way it appeared. So yeah, and he moved back and forth from like, I'm a captain, I got to get it together, and then he'd lose it again, then I'm a captain, I got to, and then he'd do something irrational. And I love that episode, and mainly his performance carries the episode.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, I don't mean to harp on that moment, but your moment of your impending doom, like knowing and having fought this thing, and just being like he's trying to hold his own brain together. That's why he's doing this. He's just this is it, and you're facing down.
Well, yeah, and it's like, does he have regret at that moment? Like, because it's easy to sit there and go, I'm going to get in this thing, I'm going to drum it down his throat. Then when it actually comes to, you're like, crap, did I just make the worst decision of my life? And you can't get out of it. There's no turning back.
Again, the Moby Dick reference. Just going down the maw of the whale. The last thing you want is to be eaten by it. So.
All right, next week, guys, we've got another good one. We've got where we get to meet V'ger. The Changeling.
In Star Trek the Motion Picture, I was like, man, this is just Nomad.
Yeah, right.
That's really what I remember. I
made 3 errors.
I hate to say that, but I always hated this. But when I sat in that theater, I brought my phaser to the theater like a big nerd. And actually they made me put it in my coat. There you can't, because I was wait
a minute, how old were you?
Ron was 32.
Was that 1979? So I was
79. Okay,
I was 62, so I was 17 or whatever. 16.
With your nerd phaser at 17.
Yeah,
Wow.
my phaser. Well, that phaser was from Star Trek Phase 2. I told you that.
Yeah. The
It
prop
was made
winner,
by
that really
Brad Nelson,
expensive
who
one.
met Gene Roddenberry, and Roddenberry wanted him to make all the new phasers for the show. So I got a hold of one when the show didn't happen. So it's a limited. It's worth like $4,000. That thing. I bought it for $75 in 1970 something.
That's a lot of money back then.
5 or 6, back then. But it's worth over $4,000 now.
How much did you pay for it?
$75. And I had to fight with my parents to, my stepfather was like, $75 for a toy.
Yeah, exactly.
He hated the whole idea of Star Trek.
Oh yeah.
My dad didn't get it either.
Yeah, so it was like, but for me, it was like, I remember when they came on at 4:00 in the afternoon or whatever. They had it on ABC for a bit. And I was, because we owned a service station. I was working on cars at a very young age. I was doing oil changes and changing tires. I was just a kid, but I would say to my stepfather, "Can I go watch Star Trek?" And he'd be like, roll his eyes, and he'd go, "Yes, you can go watch Star Trek."
At least he let you do it.
And I'd be like, "Okay," and I was just sitting there and watch.
He didn't make you feel bad. He was just like, "Okay, great."
I don't know.
I love that.
It was very clear, his feelings on it.
Yeah.
But so I got that phaser, and so I was in the theater, and the guy comes over. "You're not allowed to shine that in the theater or whatever." I'm like, "Oh my God," me and my buddy were like, "What the fuck's wrong with you,
dude? It's on stun."
Yeah. And it has a strobe effect. It was like, and I'm sitting there like just firing it, and so
somebody's necking on a date next to you.
Man. So the excitement of going to that theater and seeing Star Trek come to the movie, like as a motion picture.
Oh yeah.
And I remember walking out of there going, yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's what I did.
But during it, I'm like, what the fuck, man? This is just the Nomad story written all over again. I mean, I knew it right then. I'm like,
but then Star Trek 2 came out and it saved everything. You went, yes, this
100%,
is the
100%. Yeah. I mean,
see,
like,
Graham?
that caught the spirit of it. That was like the Doomsday Machine and all those.
Yeah.
The motion picture was this antiseptic,
silvery,
filtered, medical room look to the bridge, kind of. It just was so cold and lifeless. Just and the way Nimoy's performance was meant to be cold and lifeless. It felt like that through the whole movie.
Yeah, it did. It did. I thought that he and McCoy, when we first meet McCoy, was off character. That whole sequence where Kirk meets him in the transporter room and he's there with this little peace and love pendant and he's got the beard. And he goes, you did this.
Yeah.
I know engineers. They love to change things.
Oh, Captain, sir.
He looked like he just walked off a
said,
60s porno set or something.
Yeah.
His chest showing and everything. But yeah, Lynn's right. Nomad and the Immunity Syndrome. That was what V'ger was kind of like.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yep.
Good stuff.
All right, guys. Next week again, The Changeling. And that'll be a lot of fun. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Hopefully, we'll have Anna back next week. Her little baby was.
Remember, everybody, Anna hates The Godfather.
Don't ever forget that.
You listen.
We'll see you next week, guys.
All right, guys.
See ya. Bye-bye.
See you.
Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the starship Enterprise. Its 5-year mission to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilization, to boldly go where no man has gone